Greetings, welcome on my channel. My name is Constantine Yachnytskyi, and in this video I'm gonna share my thoughts, opinions, ideas and own experience about REST, GraphQL and gRPC. We're also gonna philosophize about it a little bit and so on. So let's start. Let's start with REST, the easiest one. I assume you all know it, at least a little bit. If you are like front-end, mobile or back-end developers, I guess there is no way you don't know about this. So generally about my experiences with REST, the simplest way to implement it, generally it's the simplest solution among all of them. It's battle tested. Usually like any services, any like SaaS solutions you use, usually they use just REST API based. I've never even seen like any, for example, paid services and so on which would use gRPC, even though like it offers you much better performance, but it also depends on the language. We're gonna also touch it a little bit later. So yes, actually in a nutshell, everyone knows REST. It's quite hard to make it too bad. I mean, a project which uses REST endpoints generally easy to implement, quite performant, not so performant as gRPC, for example, but definitely more performant than REST, for example, with Graph. Like it slipped. Forgot this idiom, slipped over my tongue, something like this. Yeah. So there are no real cons of this approach. You wouldn't lose anything if you'd like to use REST endpoints. Just it's not so performant as gRPC, but again, depends on the language. Because in Rust, for example, I don't think it's a good idea to use gRPC. If I really need gRPC, I would rather use Go, for example, for simplicity, or Java. Because with Rust, the only battle-tested solution, in my opinion and experience, like is our HTTP frameworks like Ectix, Exum, Salvo. Not sure that I pronounce them correctly, but I think you got what I mean. So yes, in a nutshell, simply quite performant, battle-tested, time-checked solution. I mean REST itself, so everything is fine. In my opinion, it's not a big deal if you need a lot of REST API endpoints, because people who like GraphQL, for example, they may give you such an argument like we have only one endpoint and you have a lot of them for REST. We'll also gonna touch it later, but again, I don't consider it as a disadvantage. And with gRPC anyway, we have the same situation. Just with gRPC, we have no endpoints, but its own way to communicate a little bit different. It's kind of like when we use services methods. But again, so let's finish with REST. Like hard to add something like this. So for example, in my own opinion and experience, if you choose REST, you lose nothing. But if, for example, you use Go or Java, such languages which have generally official support, I mean official gRPC implementation from Google, it may be a good idea to try, because you'll get a better performance generally. But it also depends on your project, because if your project, for example, provides some API services and so on, yeah, your clients, your merchants, for example, whatever, they may be scared of gRPC because it's not something unusual. I don't consider gRPC generally to be hard than REST, except one thing, that if you'd like to expose gRPC for browsers, you need to also implement gRPC web, because unfortunately right now browsers don't support gRPC at all. and it doesn't look it's gonna be better in the future. So for you to keep in mind that gRPC are incompatible with browsers. You need to use proxy, gRPC web, for example, to overcome this issue. So REST doesn't have such a problem. But for example, if your backend like works only for mobile applications like Android, iOS, they have full native support for gRPC. So yeah, it might be an interesting idea also. But if you use Rust, for example, I will use right now only REST API, so no other way, in my opinion. Yes, and about my experiences, I've never had any bad experience with REST in particular in any commercial or my own project, startup. So like, and again, just to remind that yeah, in Rust this is the only good way, in my opinion, because right now Rust doesn't have good established solutions for gRPC. There is no official support from Google. And about GraphQL, I may be wrong, but as far as I know, like, there is no good GraphQL support for Rust either. There are some libraries, but I really have doubts. It may be a good idea right now to use it with Rust, but I may be wrong. You can try to check, figure it out on your own if you'd like to. So about GraphQL, at a glance, it looks very tempting. I remember when I first figured out about it, I wanted to do everything in GraphQL. It looked like salvation. So in a nutshell, how it works: you have one single endpoint, only one, and the GraphQL uses only post. So whatever you do, it's just post, always post. Like, you can't do, for example, get, put, patch, delete, and so on with GraphQL. It's always post. It's all, yeah, you can't do them, so just keep it in mind about it. What else interesting about it? In GraphQL, you have just schema, your GraphQL schema. So it's exactly all like your structures or classes, depends on the language you use. Fields, for example, and so on. So it's exactly what, for example, your front end or mobile applications see. And this is what they understand they can use. So in GraphQL, you need to have also like your GraphQL structures. I mean, except your usual Go structures or Rust structures or Java classes, which you usually use, you also need to have special structures and classes for GraphQL. This is exactly a basic way how it works with GraphQL. You have schema and it generates for you like GraphQL structures. So this is just how it works. So yes, in Go, for example, there are two main ways to do it. It either like uses reflection and you have mapping. Actually, you always need mapping when you work with GraphQL to map, for example, your classes or structures which you receive from like front-end mobile applications generally to your graph structures, or the opposite one. And if you map them runtime, you have like quite sufficient, in my opinion, performance penalty. You can also generate it like compile time, but in this case you will have more files, you need to organize it and so on, quite inconvenient. In Rust, I think they always do it just with compilation, and it's more convenient than in Go, because Rust is much more powerful in this respect. So I assume that you won't see your generated GraphQL files generally for this mappings and so on, but I may be wrong. I've never worked with GraphQL in Rust. I've only worked with Go, so yes, here I may be wrong. You need to check it out on your own. So yes, for example, in Go, you either get performance penalty if you use runtime mapping, or like you will have one additional compilation, for example, step, and you'll have many more files in your project generated, I mean once, so you also need to keep it in mind. So at a glance it looks fantastic. You have one single endpoint, so your front end or mobile apps simply select, query what they need, your classes, structures, like their fields, like relationships, and if they have them, and so on. Looks cool, doesn't it? But you see there are a lot of caveats there. Some of them are obvious, some of them are not. First of all, just GraphQL, in my opinion, is quite bulky, because you need to have separate scheme, separate like GraphQL file structures, like it's quite inevitable. So it's not so elegant, fancy, for example, compared with the rest, for example, or even like gRPC way. I find much better generally. What's also bad about it, that you expose everything you you have to your front end, for example, all fields and so on. So in Rust it will be better, I think, because in Rust we may have optional fields which ideally don't consume any memory if they are empty, or consume 1 byte. But in Go you always need to initialize your fields even if they are completely empty. So what I mean, for example, a typical like commercial project, you have a few dozens or even hundreds fields for your classes, for your structures, and but your front end, for example, needs to query only 2 or 3 of them, for example. But you like from okay, if you use correct libraries, everything is set up correctly, okay, you in your database you query at the database level, you will query only like a few fields, not a big deal. But from your language's perspective, like Go, Rust, whatever, you will still have a huge structure, a huge class with a lot of fields. It's not a very rational using of your memory, of your like processor resources probably, and so on. So just also keep it in mind. And yes, just in my own experience, it's quite bulky, inconvenient. It's the worst performance solution compared with REST or especially gRPC. It's quite rare, so not a lot of people have ever worked with it. Not a lot of people understand how it works, how to use it, and so on. So I wouldn't use it either, neither in my personal projects, in my startups and so on, nor like in commercial projects. So I think my own experience with GraphQL may be much more eloquent than my words. So for example, my last project, it was a commercial e-commerce project for like European market generally, and initially they started with GraphQL, and eventually they cursed it a lot, and they started moving to REST generally. Not like they started rewriting everything that we already had for REST, not at all. But we tried as much as was possible at any cost just to use REST endpoints everywhere. Like it was a much better approach, for example, to create a new small REST endpoint rather than rather than use all of that bulky, messy GraphQL stuff. Also much better for performance, because with REST you can create a separate structure, for example, yes, for your endpoint with a few fields, so like you don't have any extra overhead, any extra unused fields, and so on. So I think it's much more convincing than any of my words that eventually the guys realized that GraphQL was not the best solution, and we started just using REST actually. And my own and commercial experience with gRPC. Generally itself, in my opinion, this is the best approach, the most modern, the most performant approach. Actually, it's much more efficient than JSON payloads, much better than like REST itself, because it uses a lot of compression, like it occupies less space, less memory, and so on. It's much faster itself. It can be used like for bi-directional streaming, so you can even like create real-time chat applications with gRPC. It may be not the best solution, maybe still like WebSockets, WebRTs, for example, the transport might be better generally for different situations, but you just know, yes, that for gRPC, like there are more ways to do this. But to be honest and unbiased, yeah, HTTP2 and HTTP3 also, they also support generally bi-directional streaming and so on, because anyway gRPC still uses HTTP under the hood, and this is actually why we can't use gRPC with browsers. Like one of the reasons, browsers support HTTP2 and generally even HTTP3, but unfortunately, yeah, they don't support gRPC itself. But anyway, under the hood, gRPC utilizes HTTP. Right now, by default, it's HTTP2. I think in the future they will leverage HTTP3 generally, because it's better, more modern, more performant, and so on. So yes, it maybe there are a lot of advantages generally, but yes, in my opinion, I need to mention first of all performance itself, better latencies, and one great advantage, not a lot of people may tell you about this, is that, for example, REST has a flexible scheme actually, yes, and there are quite often, yeah, it's actually a disadvantage of REST, yeah, I should have mentioned earlier, but at least I'm mentioning right now. So REST scheme is not really it's too flexible, and you always need to negotiate between front end and back end what to do, how to do, what types, and so on, because there are always possible some conflicts between them. So generally how it looks, if we, for example, use Go, Rust, Java, or Python on your backend, and like TypeScript, JavaScript on your front end, they need to duplicate actually your structure, and data types between languages may be different. So yes, there are possible problems with it that you need to solve. So just, keep it in mind. That yeah, it's a disadvantage of REST. Actually, yeah, the main disadvantage of it. And gRPC has a huge advantage, because with gRPC you have a strict scheme, and it's actually a united scheme. You defined it once, for example, in your Go, Rust, Java backend project, or even simpler, like generally somewhere like a separate repository, something like shared between front end and backend, mobile applications, yes, something that you use everywhere. And your front end use your gRPC structures generated, gRPC structures, classes, and so on. And your, for example, front end mobile application, they use the same file, the same methods, and so on. So no discrepancies, everything is the same, everything is transparent, you don't need to duplicate it. So that's actually maybe even a better advantage of gRPC, even more important than performance in my own experience, because if you've ever worked with gRPC, yes, and seen such conflicts between teams, front end, back end, mobile, you'll get me, I think, right. So yes, in a nutshell, how gRPC works, you define also your proto file, your schema, for example, your structure, your class with your fields, and then it generates protobuf files, highly optimized, and so on. The same with methods. Actually, your methods are kind of your API endpoints. it's what, for example, your front end, your mobile apps see. I mean, how they communicate to gRPC, how they select query, what they need. All of it you define in your protobuf files, and then you generate just highly optimized protobuf code. Yes, and with gRPC you don't need mapping, at least no runtime mapping, neither in Go nor in Rust, for example. That's also a huge performance advantage over GraphQL. I mean, except like much better, smaller, like faster payloads themselves and so on. Just in your backend application, for example, you don't need to map different structures to each other, gRPC to your, for example, classes or structures, or the opposite. That's also a huge win, in my opinion. You don't need to use some libraries to mitigate it, as we have with GraphQL. You don't have any problems, like penalty problems. So yes, in my own opinion, yes, gRPC is the best solution right now, but not everyone knows it, not everyone trusts it. It's something new, unusual, like, yeah, unfamiliar, not something we've got used to, and so on. And one more problem, like if your service provides some SaaS solution services, yes, I've never even seen any like gRPC services. So yes, even if your project is cool itself, your clients may have second thoughts about it, and they may prefer to use some alternatives which may be not so cool, modern, performant, and so on, but they have familiar REST API and so on. So depends on your project. But if, for example, you expose your APIs just for your own sites, like mobile apps, whatever, gRPC might be really like a good solution. The only problem is that you need to set up gRPC web for your browsers to be able to work, communicate to it. But in my opinion, pros definitely overweigh cons. So yes, just keep it in mind. gRPC is quite popular for microservices, for service to call each other, because it's faster than REST, or GraphQL has better latencies and so on. It's a separate topic, but just guys, don't do it. Don't do it, never do it. Like, if you really need normal microservices, each microservice should have its own like database, communicate with each other through some message broker, even bus, whatever you use. It's just how it's supposed to be. It's a separate topic, yeah, but if you're interested, you can also check event-driven architecture out and so on. Steven Grider has an excellent course on Udemy about microservices. Its length more than 60 hours, like 60, like 4 or 6, something like this. So for somebody who'd like really to dive into microservices, I will definitely recommend his course, and generally like any of his courses, like, don't hesitate to buy it. It's definitely worth it. He's my favorite author on Udemy. I've learned a lot from him, generally. He has like courses for Go, Rust, for example, for JavaScript, quite a lot of them. Just you can figure it out on your own. Oh my goodness, I forgotten to mention something important about gRPC itself. Okay, like, yes, also keep it in mind that Google has official gRPC implementation for a few languages, so you also need to consider it. Generally, all mainstream languages have official like gRPC implementations from Google. They're just the best themselves. They're the fastest, most reliable, battle tested, and so on. For example, all mainstream languages generally have it, like Java, Python, like Go, even C with C++. I think, they definitely have it, and so on. Ruby has it, as far as I remember. But for Ruby it may be just fine in my opinion, because it's very slow generally itself, but anyway gRPC may help it to work faster. But for Rust, unfortunately, we just don't have any official gRPC implementation from Google. We have like Tonic, as far as I remember, something else, but just guys, in my own honest opinion, just don't use it. Don't use it with Rust. If you build your backend in Rust, just use some of like well-established HTTP frameworks, like again Axiom, Actix, Salvo, like whatever you like. They're great, they're most performant, they're leaders in benchmarks among all languages that you can see. So just use them. You'll finish like with better performance, like better reliability, even security maybe, who knows, and so on. Just for Rust, unfortunately, we don't have it yet, but we're definitely gonna have it in the future. I have no doubts that sooner or later Google will add it. So yes, to summarize, REST, like, you will never lose if you choose it. GraphQL, in my personal opinion, I wouldn't recommend to use it at all. Like, maybe for some specific projects it may make sense, but generally I wouldn't use it, neither in my startups nor like for commercial projects. I mean, if I'm a hired employee, you just work on some commercial project. gRPC, if your language has like an official gRPC implementation from Google, if you don't provide like API services for different companies, I mean, in this case, definitely just use API, REST API, and that's it. I would highly recommend to look at gRPC. It may be your solution, your advantage over your rivals that you may use. So yes, for your personal projects as well, because gRPC has been gaining popularity step by step, and even right now, like, gRPC skills may be useful for you to find a job. For example, some projects, it's a demand, yes, to use, to have an experience with gRPC. So keep it in mind. So yes, and in the end, just build your projects, like architect them very well. Use, for example, hexagonal, or you can call it clean onion architecture. So like for your frameworks, libraries to be like changeable. So if your app is like designed the correct way, you can quite easily swap, for example, REST to gRPC, or even GraphQL, who knows what you need. So it wouldn't be a big deal. Yes, you will need to implement gRPC from scratch, but your business logic, your database like layer, repository layer, whatever, they will be intact. So yeah, just keep it in mind. Yeah, thanks for watching. I hope it was interesting and useful for you. So please subscribe on my channel, share this video and my channel with your friends, acquaintances. The more people know about it, the more benefits they may get it. It's beneficial for all of us, including me. Thanks. Bye.